They didn't like talking about Borek. Not in daylight, not in passing, and certainly not in front of children. He was necessary, yes, he provided meat, bone broth for the sick, fat for candles, but no one invited him to weddings or festivals. He was always on the edge of things. Like a storm cloud everyone prayed wouldn't roll their way. And that suited Borek just fine. He didn't want their smiles or their songs. He didn't want their gossip, their fake blessings, or their pity. All he wanted was silence, steel, and certainty. He got those things in one place, his butcher's block. He had once been a different man, or so the old folks said. He had once laughed. Had once had a wife who brought him flowers wrapped in twine. A wife who sang to their baby girl even when her hands bled from washing cloth. But laughter doesn't last where grief grows. His wife died in winter. No warning. Just a fever, a few gasping nights, and then silence that never lifted. He buried her under the oak tree behind the house and never once spoke her name again. He raised Mara alone. Barely. By the time Mara was 7, she spoke little and smiled less. Her skin was pale, and she got sick often. Borek did what he could, built her a small bed by the fire, gave her broth before meat, even sat with her at night when the coughing wouldn't stop. But he never touched her. Never said, "I love you." He didn't know how to anymore. So he gave her silence. The village whispered, "He's cursed." You know what they say about men who kill for a living. No wonder his daughter's always ill. He ignored it all. Until the day he went to the auction yard. He hadn't planned on buying anything. His cart was already half full. 2 pigs, 1 goat, and a barrel of offcuts for stew. But then he saw her. The cow stood apart from the others. Not penned. Not tied. Just still. Like she had walked there on her own and simply stopped when the world stopped caring. She was filthy, dried mud crusted on her legs, patches of missing hair, one eye swollen shut. Her right hind leg shook every few seconds, barely holding weight. Yet she didn't make a sound, didn't moan, didn't shiver. She stood with the dignity of something long forgotten. The auctioneer scoffed when Borek walked over. "That one. She's half dead." Borek didn't reply. "Too old to birth. Can't milk her. And meat's tough as bark." Still nothing. "Honestly," the man snorted, "I'll let her go for a single coin, just to get her off the lot." A pause. Then the metallic sound of one small coin hitting dry dirt. Borek didn't even haggle. He just nodded. As he loaded the cow into his cart, a few boys jeered. "Hey Borek, buying bones now? She's more ghost than cow." He didn't turn. But someone else did. A voice, small, sharp, full of fire. "She's not a ghost. She's better than any of you." It was a little girl, barely tall enough to see over the fence. Dust on her cheeks. A red string tied in her hair. She looked straight at Borek. "Don't kill her." He stared at her, stone-faced. "You think she deserves to live?" The girl didn't flinch. More than some people do. That night, the sky went black early. Storm clouds gathered without thunder. The village huddled inside. But Borek was in his shed, sharpening knives. He tied the cow to a post near the fence, didn't bother with shelter. Tossed a bucket of water nearby, but no food. She was meant to be slaughtered the next day. As he pulled the whetstone along his cleaver, sparks jumped. Steel hummed. He worked by instinct. Mara lay curled on her side in the small room behind the fire. Her breaths were shallow. Her skin hot. Borek had noticed earlier. He'd added more broth to her bowl. But he told himself she was fine. She always was. Out in the dark, the wind shifted. The cow raised her head. Something moved in the air, not a scent, exactly, but a feeling. Heat. Not from the storm, from something inside the house. A life slipping. A spark catching. She strained against the rope. One step. It held. Another. The knot tightened. Then, with a final lurch, the rope snapped. She limped toward the house, hooves silent on the damp dirt. She stopped at the door. Wood. Heavy. She didn't know how to knock. So she pushed. Once. Nothing. Again. The hinges groaned. On the third, the door creaked open. Rain splashed in. Borek stood from his bench, cleaver in hand, and froze. There, soaked to the bone, covered in old wounds and dirt, stood the cow, breathing hard. Steam rising from her hide. Rain falling like coins around her. She didn't move. Just looked at him. Then, turned. Something in Borek's chest twisted. He followed her gaze, toward the hallway. Then, a cough. Dry. Hollow. Wrong. He dropped the cleaver. Ran. Mara lay twisted in her blanket, eyes wide but not seeing. Her chest barely moved. Her lips were pale. Borek fell to his knees, held her shoulders, shook her once. Breathe, Mara, breathe. She didn't respond. Until, the cow stepped into the room, pressed her nose to Mara's cheek, paused. Then, slowly, knelt beside her, and lay still. Rain fell like punishment from the heavens. Thick, angry, relentless. It pounded rooftops, clawed at window shutters, soaked the earth until it bled into the village paths. Wind tore through trees, howling like spirits with unfinished stories. The sky was a black sheet, torn open again and again by flashes of lightning that lit the houses like dying candles. Inside the butcher's home, the storm was quiet. Not because it wasn't heard, but because something more terrifying than thunder had taken over the room. Mara lay unconscious. She hadn't eaten all day. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. Her forehead burned like coal, and her limbs twitched randomly, as if her body was trying to flee itself. Borek sat in the next room, sharpening his cleaver by lantern light. But his hands weren't moving. He just stared at the blade, at the shine of it, the coldness, and at his reflection, barely visible in the metal. He looked older tonight, more tired, more afraid. He didn't know what to do. Not when his wife died years ago. Not now. The healer lived only 5 houses away. He could run, pound the door, beg. But he didn't. Because pride is louder than fear, until it isn't. And Borek had never begged for anything. Not once. Outside, the cow stood alone. Still wet. Still untethered after the rope had snapped. She hadn't wandered. She hadn't run. She stood near the side wall of the house, one ear turned toward the window, listening. Her ribs rose and fell like heavy doors. She could hear the girl's breaths, could feel them. Shallow, weak, like wind in dying leaves. She turned her head toward the door. The storm was nothing to her now. The cold didn't matter. Her hooves, sore and cracked, stepped toward the entrance again. She nudged it. The wood groaned. It had been closed earlier, but the wind had worked at it. The latch was loose now. Another nudge. The door swung open with a bang. Borek shot up. He reached instinctively for the cleaver, but stopped halfway. Rain poured in, and through it, the silhouette. A hulking shape. Broad shoulders. Shaking legs. A beast with fire behind its eyes. It was her. The cow. Soaked, mud-covered, steaming from the heat of her exertion. Her chest heaved. Her eyes scanned the room. Then, without hesitation, she walked inside. "Get out," Borek said, but his voice lacked conviction. He took a step forward, but she turned her head sharply toward the hallway, toward Mara's room. She began walking again, slow but firm, limping, but with purpose. "Stop," he barked. She didn't. She passed him, and with every step, something strange grew in his chest. A weight he didn't recognize. Not fear. Not anger. Something older. Something like awe. She entered Mara's room. Borek followed. His boots left muddy prints on the floor. His breath came heavy, more from panic than exertion. Inside, the cow approached the bed. Mara lay limp, her mouth barely open, her fingers twitching. The cow lowered herself. First the front legs, then the hind ones, with a strained grunt. She knelt beside the bed and lowered her head. What happened next didn't seem real. The cow pressed her forehead gently against Mara's side. She didn't move, didn't moan, just pressed. Soft, warm. A pulse met a pulse. And then, she began to hum. It wasn't a voice. Not a moo. Not a groan. A vibration. A low, resonant sound from deep in her chest. Like thunder behind mountains. It was steady, calming, unnatural, and yet familiar. Mara stirred. Her back arched slightly. Then, she breathed in. Long, deep, pure. Borek dropped to his knees. His hands trembled. His throat tightened. He looked at his daughter. Color returned to her cheeks. Her lips stopped trembling. The fever didn't vanish, but it stepped back, as if something ancient had challenged it, and won. He reached out and placed his hand on her forehead. She didn't flinch. Her skin was still hot, but her expression was peaceful now, no longer twisted in pain. She whispered something, barely audible. "Mama." Borek choked. "No," he said quietly. "Just us. And the cow." He got up, left the room for a moment, returned with a blanket. He placed it over both of them, the cow and the child. Then he backed away slowly, sat against the wall and watched. The storm screamed outside. The wind slammed against the house. But it couldn't get in, because something stronger now lived inside that room. They stayed that way all night. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He listened to the hum of the cow, to the breathing of his daughter, to the way the storm outside, eventually, gave up. At dawn, light crept in through the cracks in the shutters. Mara stirred. She opened her eyes, smiled, weakly. Her hand rested on the cow's ear. "You stayed," she whispered. The cow let out a soft exhale. Borek rose. His knees cracked. His back ached. But he didn't feel pain. Not like before. He walked outside. Rain had stopped. The village glistened in morning mist. He fetched clean water, warm oats, soft towels. Not for himself. For the cow. He cleaned her legs, checked her eyes, spoke, quietly. Why? She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. That afternoon, villagers passed by. They saw her, the cow, not tied, not penned, but resting peacefully in the yard. And they saw him, the butcher, brushing her side, his sleeves rolled up, his face soft. They didn't understand. They didn't need to. Inside the house, Mara slept. And in the space between breaths, Borek understood something he had never believed before. That souls come in many shapes. That some creatures are born to suffer, so they can teach others to feel again. For the first time in years, Borek opened his shutters before noon. The early light painted the butcher's house in gold, soaking into the worn wood like warmth forgotten. The storm had passed, but its memory still hung in the sky, clouds bruised and slow to leave. Outside, the cow stood near the porch, her legs muddy, her flanks still thin. Yet there was something different about her. Not in shape, but in presence. She no longer looked broken. She looked placed. Like a puzzle piece returned to where it had always belonged. Borek stepped out barefoot, holding a clean cloth and a bowl of oats soaked in goat's milk. The villagers who passed along the muddy road slowed down. Some pretended not to look. Others stared. But no one spoke. He knelt beside the cow and cleaned her wounds without speaking. His hands, once so mechanical with knives, now moved slowly, gently, with intention. She stood still. When he finished, she lowered her head toward his chest, just for a moment. Then stepped back. That was the first time he felt it. Not gratitude. Not redemption. Permission. By mid-morning, children gathered at the fence. Among them was the little girl with the red thread in her hair, the one who had shouted at the auction. She didn't speak. She just watched. Eventually, Borak stepped forward. He reached over the fence with something small in his hand. An apple. He didn't offer it to the children. He offered it to the cow. The cow took it. Bit once. Chewed slowly. The girl smiled. So did Borak. But only a little. That night, Mara was able to sit up in bed. Her fever had lessened, though her voice was still soft and cracked. She asked for the cow. Is she still here? She hasn't left, Borak said. Can she sleep inside again? He looked out the window. Saw her lying in the yard, her breath rising in slow waves under the stars. I think, he said slowly, she already is. Word spread. By the end of the week, everyone knew the story. Some believed it. Others called it myth, nonsense, or something worse. A woman at the market muttered, that cow's cursed. Sick girl saw a vision, not real life. Another sneered, he's not feeding her for free. He's fattening her up. But there were others, quieter voices, who leaned in and said, I think he's changing. The baker, whose wife had died the winter before, left a loaf at Borak's door. No note. Just bread. The healer stopped by to offer herbs for Mara's recovery. She asked nothing in return. Even the mayor's youngest son, who had once kicked the fence near Borak's home just to taunt the old man, left a drawing under a rock by the gate. It was crude. But it showed a girl, a cow, and a man standing between them. Inside the house, something had also changed. Borak had placed the cleaver in a box, nailed it shut, put it on a shelf. He still butchered now and then, old contracts, loyal customers, but only when necessary, and never with pleasure. His focus had shifted. He spent mornings brushing the cow, evenings reading aloud to Mara. He even rebuilt the back fence, one shaky post at a time, with his daughter watching from the window. You're not the same, she said once, quietly. He didn't answer, because he knew she was right. The cow, now called Luma by Mara, followed Borak from place to place. She didn't graze far. She didn't wander. She always stayed close. And when Mara was strong enough to walk again, she would limp out to the yard and lean against Luma's side, her arms wrapped around the thick, quiet ribs. One evening, weeks after the storm, a cry rang out from the other end of the village. A boy had fallen into the well behind the mill. The ladder was rotten. The water was rising. The family screamed. People ran, shouted, brought ropes. But no one could reach him. No one would go in. Until Borak arrived. With Luma. At first, people laughed. A cow. What, is she going to lower a bucket? But Borak didn't speak. He walked to the edge of the well, looked down, and saw the boy, no more than 6, clinging to a ledge. The opening was narrow. Too narrow for a man. But Luma? Luma lay down beside the well. Waited. Borak tied a rope around her middle. He climbed down with care, using the knots as grip. Halfway, the rope slipped. People gasped. Luma didn't move. She braced herself. Hooves pressed to dirt. Head low. Holding him steady. He reached the boy. Lifted him up. Climbed back. And when they reached the top, soaked and coughing, the village stood in silence. That night, someone painted over the old sign outside Borak's shop. The blood-stained cleaver? Gone. In its place, a cow's eye. Not full of rage, but peace. The first frost came in silence. No birds. No wind. Just a hush that blanketed the village in white breath and brittle light. It was the kind of morning that made old men sit quietly by their fires and children press their hands to the glass, watching their own reflections grow older in the cold. But Borek was already outside. He stood with a wool blanket in his hands, watching Luma. The cow hadn't moved all night. She stood facing east, eyes fixed on the hills. She hadn't eaten her oats. She hadn't curled in the straw. She hadn't made a sound. Mara joined him, rubbing her arms. "She didn't sleep," she whispered. "No," Borek said softly. "She's waiting." They didn't know for what. But in the quiet way that people do, they understood something was ending. Luma's ribs no longer trembled. Her breath was even. She looked still. But not sick. Not suffering. Just finished. Borek placed the blanket gently across her back. She didn't flinch. She blinked once and then closed her eyes. That day, he didn't cut meat. Didn't open the shutters to the shop. Didn't boil broth or scrub knives. Instead, he sat in the yard beside her. And the villagers came. It started with the girl with the red thread. She brought a small bunch of wildflowers and tied them into the wooden rail near the porch. She didn't say a word. Then came the baker's apprentice, still dusty with flour, carrying a basket of dry bread ends. He set them by the well and walked away. By noon, 12 people had stopped by. Not to gawk. Not to ask. Just to stand. And to wait. Inside, Mara drew with charcoal on scraps of cloth. She sketched Luma standing beneath the oak tree. Then Luma curled beside her bed. Then Luma's eyes. She stopped after that. Folded the drawings into a box. Closed it tightly. By nightfall, Borek brought warm mash soaked in honey. Luma sniffed it. Nudged it gently. But didn't eat. She stood only because she always stood. Because lying down, now, would mean something final. Mara pressed her forehead to Luma's flank. She whispered something. No one heard what. But when she looked up, her eyes were dry. "Papa," she said quietly. "I think she's saying goodbye." Borek felt something tighten in his chest. He nodded. Then kneeled beside her. He didn't say goodbye. He said thank you. That night, the stars broke through the frost clouds. The air shimmered with silence. And in the morning, Luma was no longer breathing. She lay curled beneath the old oak, head resting in the straw, eyes closed, face peaceful. She looked more like a sculpture than a body. Like something carved from earth and wind, not born of blood and bone. Borek covered her with a wool sheet. The villagers came early. They came in 2s and 3s, dressed in simple black and gray. Some brought candles. Others brought food. Some brought nothing but silence. The healer came last. She carried a sign. White wood. Soft letters. She gave more than she took. Borek nodded. And drove the sign into the ground himself. They dug a place for her beneath the oak, beside the spot where his wife had rested all these years. He hadn't visited that grave in seasons. But now, as he stood between them, he felt something he hadn't in decades. Not grief. Not even peace. Belonging. They laid her to rest with flowers. With straw. With quiet prayers. No songs. No speeches. Just stories. The girl with the red string spoke first. "She saved me when I fell from the bridge. No one saw, but she did. She pushed me back up. Others joined in. She knew when my baby would come. She stopped a fire in the barn. She led me home when I was drunk and lost." One by one, the village built a story too big to ignore. A story that wasn't about coincidence or instinct, but something deeper, something divine. That evening, Borek returned to the workshop. He opened the box. Inside was his old cleaver. Still sharp. Still clean. He lifted it. Weighed it in his hand. Then set it on the anvil. And struck it with the hammer. Once. twice, 3 times, until the blade split in two. He buried the pieces beside her grave, then sat beside the oak until night swallowed the world again. The days that followed were quiet. Mara continued to draw. She taught children letters on the porch. Borek mended fences, built benches, repaired tools. He refused to charge. No payment, he'd say. Just kindness, passed forward. They never bought another cow. Didn't need to. Because something of Luma stayed. In the way birds nested on the windowsill. In the way sun hit the yard at dusk. In the stillness of Mara's sleep. Years later, a traveler passed through. He stopped at the square, noticed the carved statue. A cow, head bowed, flank arched, eyes kind. He asked a boy, "Why is there a statue of a cow in your village?" And the boy grinned. "She saved our butcher." "Really?" "Yes," the boy said proudly. "And his daughter too." "From what?" The boy thought. Then answered softly. "From forgetting how to feel."